All right, good morning, everyone. Is this still working, Ron? Okay, good. Well, thank you for coming out. So great to see you this morning. Welcome to actually, I don't even know what number we're on now. Let's pretend it's the 10th. The 10th showcase, Leadership Tool Showcase for the Center for Positive Leadership. And we're so glad you're here and hope that you'll find it useful today. Just to get started with announcements before we move on, you probably have already looked, but in your folder, there's a couple of flyers for the next couple of showcases. Oh, here, you can have this one. And then just to get you to know, there isn't a lot of materials today like there usually is because our tool is online. And so hopefully you all brought either your phones or your computers or some kind of device that you can use as we go through this today. But before we dive into the actual assessment, I want to talk about what we're going to be doing. So, and let me just also, first of all, I should probably introduce myself. Thank you, Rami. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ryan Quinn, and I am the academic director of the Center for Positive Leadership, and Rami is the administrative program director for the Center for Positive Leadership. I've been here 11 years for the University of Louisville as a professor and a department chair. The simple self-assessment that we are introducing today from the Center for Positive Leadership will be the first in a series of assessments that, assessments and reflections. There will be other things, so they won't all be assessments. But we're hoping that you will see, both find them useful and also see how they help you to tie into the many other programs, tools, activities that are also done at the Center for Positive Leadership. So with that in mind, let's get started. And I want to start this morning by just talking about assessments in general. And by in general, I don't just mean self-assessments or leadership assessments, but the whole concept of assessment. Why do we do assessments? As you can see, for example, here, I put up a picture of a medical situation where someone's getting a medical assessment. There's all kinds of assessments that are out there. Why do we do assessments? Okay, so one reason we do them is if we establish a baseline, right, then we can actually compare, and if we do another assessment later, we can see if we've actually made progress on it. Okay, good. Other thoughts? Why else might we do assessments? Yeah?
There might be a comparative purpose.
Like not only can I compare myself now with myself later, I could also compare myself with other people, or we might aggregate it and compare our group with another group. Okay, good.
Go ahead. I was going to say to determine how something's working, just in general, how things are probably working.
Yeah, I want to actually understand better. Yeah. Okay, good. Vivian?
I was going to say enhance our self-awareness.
Ooh, say more about that one.
Because self-awareness is really a starting point to just kind of understanding ourselves, first of all, and where we want to go, and so a lot of these other elements that people have mentioned, helps us to figure out and measure our progress along the way. But that self-awareness is essential as a starting point.
Awesome, thank you. We probably will get back to the topic of self-awareness as we go through this because it's a concept that sounds good in principle and is easy to talk about, but turns out it's a lot more difficult in practice than even those of us who have had experiences of increasing our self-awareness can suddenly discover that the next step of self-awareness was just as hard as the last one. So I think that's an interesting idea. Let me switch the flavor of this conversation just a little bit. And instead of asking why do we do them in general, what has made the difference for you when you've been involved in some kind of assessment, whether it's a leadership assessment like the one today or some other kind of assessment? What makes the difference between a good experience with assessments and a not so good experience? Have you had both experiences, good and bad ones? And if so, what makes a difference?
Bad surveys.
Say more.
I mean, there's an art to writing surveys, Right. I know there's a lot more to assessments than just surveys.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, a survey that asks questions that are not really, I'm just writing a 4-question, double-barrel question, those sorts of things. But also just assessments that seem to be not really getting at the heart of what it is that is being assessed.
Yeah.
So questions that, I don't know why I'm doing this, repetitive, just not logical.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm going to do that.
Okay, Olivia?
They're too long. They're too long, and people, assessments that are too long, and folks disengage in the middle of it. like, well, I'm just gonna click through. I've done it.
Mhm.
You know, it gets frustrating when you've got to block out more time than you have to be able to complete stuff.
Absolutely.
I think going off these first two assessments, that can really, like, you see the payout, because I think when there are like unproductive questions and you don't see the payout, like if there's a long assessment and I'm like, oh, that makes sense that I answered all those questions because I'm seeing this result, then that makes it worth it. But when there's not the results that I'm expecting or the payout that I want, or just the information that I'm looking for, then there's not like the...
Why did I spend my time on that? Can you give us an example of an assessment that you've done where you actually got a good payout? Like, wow, this is what I got out of it.
I had a lot of friends who were really into the Enneagram for a long time, and I was like, I don't think you should like base your personality on this. And I still think you shouldn't like base your personality, like you shouldn't. I think that you can take it too far with like some personality tests, but I ended up taking it, and it was this long test, and I took it with like other people, and we were doing it, and afterwards, I actually like really did get some insights about myself that I was really surprised about, that I like have applied, like just to help me to understand myself better. Where it was like a really long test, and I did like the whole time I was like, this is super dumb. And then I actually like saw like those results like actively in the future, and like since then I've thought about the results and changed my actions and like observed my actions differently because of what I learned from that.
So it actually led to behavioral change.
Yes, it actually led to behavioral change and like just understanding, which
Yeah.
I think understanding leads to change as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Did you have a?
Just wanted to say, if the purpose is not clear,
Uh-huh.
the purpose of the assessment or survey or whatever,
Yeah.
or is not completely focused and tries to identify more things than just one or two and solve multiple problems than just one.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that's a general principle for life. When we don't know the purpose, we're going to not enjoy something quite as much. So, okay, good. So, as we get ready to do this today, we're going to be focusing on assessing leadership around virtues, which is how we do things at the Center for Positive Leadership. We focus on virtues, and by virtues, what I mean is standards of moral excellence, such as courage, compassion, humility, honesty, those kinds of qualities that we often use to define ourselves or others, but we also can use to define actions. And we'll focus a lot on the actions when we talk about leadership. But this is different, for example, from a personality test. And a lot of leadership assessments are either personality assessments of some kind, or they're looking at your style in some way. And so as a result, they can be fun and pleasant because it's like there's no wrong answer. It doesn't matter if I'm an introvert or an extrovert, I'm still a good person either way, and whatever else. And we talk about it in terms of using your style. So if I'm a woo or if I'm an influencer or whatever, it's not a bad option that comes out of that. When you're assessing virtues, the opposite of a virtue is a vice. And so this is not like most of your traditional assessments out there. And therefore, your temptation as you take this to engage in inflating your self-opinion is going to be even higher than it would be in one where we're just assessing your personality or assessing your style or something like that, where there's no judgment involved. This is not other people judging you, it's a self-assessment, so it's you judging you, and that's a dangerous thing sometimes. Because some of us have the problem of getting too down on ourselves, and others of us have the problem of not being down on ourselves perhaps as much as we should. And in fact, probably both are true of all of us sometimes. And so as you do this, that's one of the things that's going to make this assessment different is I want to emphasize up front, we're going to be assessing the degree to which you lead with virtues. And I want to also emphasize that every human being is a work in progress. None of us have achieved perfection. And so if we accept that up front and say, you know what, there are ways, even the best leader can improve their leadership in some ways. And there's nothing wrong with that. And most likely, we're going to find that I'm better at leading with some virtues than I am with others. And the ones that you're good at leading with are going to be different than the ones I'm good at leading with. And so if we can accept up front that the goal of this is that we always can and should get better at this, and that doesn't mean you're a bad person if there's still things you can get better at, that's fine. So if we can take as much of the stigma out of this as possible, this is an assessment, but it's not an assessment that we want to have stigma around, but it is an assessment that we want to use to help us get better at things. So it's not just going to be this pleasant, I can name myself and then be happy with whatever. If you do it well, there'll be some things you'll be like, oh, I am doing pretty well at that. And there'll be others that are like, oh, it hurts that I'm not doing as well as that as I thought I should or thought I could. Does that make sense? All right, so with that in mind, let's not take any more time to talk about it. Let's dive right in. So if you use this QR code, or you can type the URL underneath it if you have your computer with you. If you have your phone and you want to do it that way, you can use the QR code. But this will take you to the Center for Positive Leadership website, the home page. And when you get there, you just click on self-assessment in the upper left corner, and it'll take you straight into the assessment. So I'll give you a minute to get there.
And if you need Wi-Fi and you're not part of the UofL system, it's UofL Visitor, and I don't think there's a password. Yeah.
So let us know if there are any technical problems. It should take you to the web page, and then you click the last of the links at the top of the page. Or if it's a phone, it'll be drop down, yeah. Click that, and then it should start it right up. Does anybody still need the URL or the QR code? Okay, so I'm not going to structure this as you go through. I'll let you go through at your own pace. Some people are faster at these, some people take longer. Qualtrics says it should take you about 16 minutes to do it, so you can assess what that means. But just so that you know, there's basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 segments plus an email that it sends you so you can have your results after it's done. And as we go through, please stop if you have questions and like say, hey, what about this? They can be technical questions like, how can I do this better, or what does this mean, or whatever else. But it can also just be like, can we stop and talk about why did you design the assessment this way? And that's one of the advantages of being here in person to do something like this, is you can stop and ask questions like that. So don't hesitate. Don't worry about bothering other people. This is meant to be a conversation and learning together. All right? Take a minute, go through, ask any questions you have. So a question came up that I'll explain real quick that also addresses Kristen's comment from a minute ago. There are some questions which will seem a little more repetitive than others. The reason that's done is because in scientific research using psychometrics, if there aren't some questions that ask the same kind of thing, try to ask the same question in a different way, then you can't prove that you're actually using a valid construct. And so almost all of the questions in this survey are based on validated scientific instruments, but that does require some repetitiveness in order for it to work that way. So that's the explanation for that. A couple of quick comments on some of the things that came up earlier. One of the things that struck me as amusing is I was comparing an assessment that focuses on virtues with one that focuses on personality, and saying that one evaluates and judges more than the other. But when I was in high school, I applied for a job at Mrs. Fields Cookies, and part of the application was a personality test, and they told me I couldn't get hired because I failed the personality test. So apparently you can, fail a personality test too. So maybe it's not so exclusive in that regard. There's another point I was going to make, but then I lost it on that one. So, yeah, I know. I don't know if my personality's improved at all since then, but here we are. So, let me start by actually commenting on another thing that you might find different. When you get to these pages of the assessment where it shows you your results, and it has the 2 reflection questions on each of those pages, it asks you to not only appreciatively examine the results you're given, but also critically examine them. one of those is going to probably be harder for us than the others, right? In some cases, it's going to be, hey, it's easy for me to appreciate these results and it's hard for me to criticize them. And other ones, it's going to be easy to criticize and hard to appreciate. And one reason we might criticize is because we feel like the questions weren't worded correctly or some of those kinds of things. And actually, although I did defend having repetitive questions, and in fact, I would even go further on the repetitive questions, if you take an assessment that has no repetitive questions, there's a good chance that it's not a scientifically validated assessment, right? So that's just something to think about first of all, is should I really trust it if there's actually no repetitiveness at all? But the other thing that, that we should think about with that is one of the things, there you may have encountered other things as well, but one of the things that I actually would hope you would be critical of as you take this assessment is the very notion of looking at tendencies. So the fact is it may have said, I have a tendency to be honest or to trust other people or whatever it is. And if you're like most human beings, yeah, I may have a tendency, but I still had trouble answering this question because there's lots of times I don't trust, or there are some times when I'm not entirely honest, or whatever it may be. And so anytime you do an assessment that talks about tendencies, it's not going to feel like it fits perfectly. One of the reasons why we're putting together multiple assessments and reflection tools, the remainder to come out hopefully in the next few months, is to help get past that. So this is our first simple positive leadership assessment. And part of the reason why it's simple is because it's looking at general tendencies. But some of the later assessments and reflections are actually going to help you dive into what about the aberrations from that, and what do I do with those? So with that in mind, let's talk about the results of what you generated here. A few questions for us to think about together. First of all, how do you think the results of your assessment might be different if someone else were to assess you instead of this being a self-assessment? And if you really want to think about this, you might want to actually think about it in terms of some specific people. Think of a specific coworker or a specific family member or some specific person and say, how would they fill this assessment out differently from how I filled it out?
That was on my mind the whole time.
The whole time? Okay, how so?
Well, I just was thinking about my formal persona and my informal one at home, and sometimes they don't really match.
Yeah.
I know that.
It's interesting.
Now it's making me blush, I'm sorry.
You're fine. It's interesting. I once read, there's a science fiction author, Orson Scott Card, who wrote, his most famous book was Ender's Game. There was a movie made out of it. And then there was a book where a bunch of other artists, or other authors, wrote about Ender's Game. They wrote essays on the book. And one of the things that was interesting is they wrote an essay and then Card would respond to it. And it was, to me, it was a pretty interesting book. And in one of his responses, he said, we tend to think, and this is a problem that writers have, is that when writers, create a character, they often make a fixed character with a personality that never changes and always the same. But the fact is none of us are that way. And one of the things he described, he says, one of the best examples of this is if you've ever read or watched the movies of The Lord of the Rings, and there's Frodo and Bilbo and Sam. And Frodo is not the same person with Sam that he is with, or not Bilbo. Frodo is not the same person he is with Gollum and that he is with Sam. And Sam is not the same person with Frodo. And because it's a three-person unit that's moving around, it's much more easy to see how personalities are different in relationship than they are independently. And so when you think about I'm the person at home versus I'm the person at work, that's an interesting observation. And you could actually go through and fill out the assessment with home in mind and then go through and fill it out again with work in mind and perhaps get different results.
It all speaks to how complex we are as humans.
Absolutely. Yeah, good. Other thoughts about having somebody else fill this out for you instead of you filling it out yourself?
When I think of my tendencies, they're usually rooted in some sort of like initial emotional disposition.
Yeah.
But what the world sees is hopefully a deliberately selected behavior. Mm-hmm. And so at any given time, I would say that I usually would hold between 5 and 8% of the people I've led in pretty low regard because they were selfish, nitpickers, gossipers. They just were not good people. Like unapologetically, these were not good people. But I was cognizant of that, and so people may think, wow, that's great, Sean really shows them respect. Like, I don't respect them, I have deliberately chosen to exhibit a behavior that at least outwardly projects that. So my tendencies and my behavior, therefore, somebody may rate me higher in some of these categories than I would have rated myself. Because they're seeing like I'm playing a role for the greater good, inconsistent with what my initial reaction might be.
But do you think they're fooled?
Like the particular people in that lowest strata, could probably care less. People with certain just nasty dispositions. But other people might think, gosh, I don't know how he kept his mouth shut after what they did. So maybe other people were.
I think that's interesting, right? Because whether the persona we project actually gets projected probably has something to do with the self-awareness and other awareness of the people we're projecting it to in that respect. Yeah.
I think similarly to like the at-home versus like in other settings thing, I think that for me, a lot of times, I like who I am a lot more when I'm around people that I love. And I think that that's something, like when we like the people, like it's so easy for me to be generous and to be kind with the people that I love, and when I'm not around, when I'm not in a situation that's with people I love, and I think that part of it's like I can do better, but it is just like a natural. I don't like blame myself for the fact that when I'm not with people that I actively love, it just is like harder to exhibit those good virtues, or harder to like intrinsically want to exhibit those good virtues. And so I think that like it depends on how much, like the people, when I think about what different people would say about me, a big part of it is like the people who I love the most would probably have better things to say about me because I just naturally exhibit those virtues more with those people.
One of the underlying issues this is getting at is wholeheartedness or sincerity with which we do things. And this is actually a topic in virtue ethics, which is what we base our model of leadership off of, and also one of the reasons why all of us can always get better. I can do something that, as Sean was saying, that is like I'm going to show respect in this situation. I'm showing respect even though I don't feel respect. And so the reason why Karen then raises the questions, but can they tell, is because if you do that with the 8% of just nasty people, they may not care or tell or whatever else. But if I do that with just other people, it might start, as Bob Marley once saying, you can fool some people sometimes, but you can't fool all the people all the time. And so one of the things that we can do when we get to that issue of how do you always keep improving on these things, one of the ways that most of us can continue to improve is the wholeheartedness with which we exhibit virtues. Even if I'm showing them and behaviorally doing them, it's another thing to actually have them be part of my whole soul when I do it. And so that's why, I'd be skeptical if any of us put 7s on all of these. Because to have not only achieved that once is an amazing thing, but to achieve that as a general tendency would be a pretty amazing accomplishment to always be able to put 7 on something, on one of the assessments. Okay, how might you better leverage the virtues that came out well for you, that you say, oh, this is something that I do I tend to exhibit this more frequently maybe than I exhibit other virtues. Is there a way you can leverage that and build it and use it as a strength?
Awareness, we were talking about it earlier, I think Vivian mentioned it. Awareness is the first thing. So once we're aware of, hey, I tend to do this a little bit more naturally or wholeheartedly, then you can start to have that intentionality behind it. So you don't express it or exude it on accident anymore. Maybe you do just, because that's the way you are, but you're able to leverage that in, not in a manipulative way, but leverage it more intentionally in your relationships, whether it is at work or at home or whatever it is. So it all does really start with that awareness piece.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's going to always come back to that in one form or another.
Yeah, if you weren't aware of it, then how can you express it more?
Absolutely.
Put it on a Post-it note and stick it on the mirror. So you see it first thing in the morning.
Yes, remind myself I have some strengths to start with. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Practice the presence, yes.
Okay, good. One thing to think about in this regard is, are there ways I can leverage the virtues that I'm better at to help me with the ones that I'm not as good at? Because all virtues are ultimately interrelated in various ways, right? So for example, maybe I rated myself, just to pick two out of the blue, maybe I rated myself high on compassion, but maybe lower on honesty. Well, if I'm really going to be compassionate for a person and not, take it from all the way from compassion to pity, at some point I've got to actually be honest in there too. And so it might be useful to think, how can I specifically use the virtues that come more naturally to me to help me learn to be better at those? In fact, the research in negotiations shows that, there are people who struggle to negotiate for themselves. You get into a salary negotiation, I'm up with the boss here, and the boss comes and she's really hard, arguing the salary for me. And I tend to be like, you know what, I don't need more money. Why should I keep negotiating? And it's just hard for me to make myself do it. One of the things that they found, scientists have found in studies, is that for those people who struggle to negotiate for themselves, if you instead help them frame it, you're negotiating for someone else. I'm negotiating for my family, for my children, for my employees, for whoever else. They turn from the pushovers into the mama bears who go and fight off whatever else, and they get very strong negotiators because they can easily negotiate for others instead of for themselves. And that's a way I can take what's a strength of mine, I care about people, and use it to leverage another virtue like ambition or persistence or other virtues that may not come as naturally to me by leveraging one to help with the other. Okay? All right, so if you happen to have any that you thought didn't turn out so well, any thoughts about what you might do about that?
My tendency for that one is to go to the people whom I love and trust and talk to them about it and say, do you think this accurately reflects me and whom I really trust? And say, what would you recommend? If I were going to handle this in the future, how would you want me to handle it? Things like that.
Yeah. No.
Because
So.
I need that kind of.
And if they say, yeah, you can work on that, Kristen, then what?
Then, that's a good question. Then what would I do? I gotta think about it.
Okay, good. Vicki?
Sometimes, so I've used strength finders
Okay.
before, and had my whole group take the assessments so that we could find out about each other and figure out where we can, I want to say, exploit our strengths and reduce our weaknesses. And so one of the things that I found out is I'm compassionate, but I'm not empathic. So I don't pick up on other people's cues naturally. Okay, it's just busy.
Yeah.
I'm focused. I don't pick up on it. I never have. And at this point in my life, I doubt if I ever will. Okay, but I had to say, okay, but I need a guide. I need someone who is around me who can pick up on those things and say, hey, Vicki, you may not have picked up on this, but so-and-so's struggling with this, that, or the other thing. And it may be work-related, it may be something in their personal life, but they need some compassion, they need, some help. And so I make sure that I have that person on my team, because I need them to have their antenna up to come tell me so I can respond appropriately. And so, sometimes it's not necessarily changing something in myself, but making sure I have the right people around me who can pick up on those things.
I love that example. In fact, I think it ties in well to what Kristen was saying, right? Is after I talk to them, if I trust them, I can ask them to be an accountability partner for me. And accountability may be like follow up on my efforts to improve myself or whatever, or an accountability partner may be, I just am really bad at this. And if you will, once I know somebody's suffering, no problem being compassionate, but I am just blind to those things. Will you help me see them? I think that's a beautiful way, and you could do that with almost any virtue. There'll be some part of it that once you pick it apart, and this is one of the reasons why we have other assessments and reflections coming, is this one's about tendencies. The next one that's going to be coming out is actually going to have you identify specific events where I excelled at leading with these virtues, and other ones where I didn't do well, and compare them. And when you compare those kinds of events with each other, it's much easier to pick up on the trends of things like, why is it that I'm not being compassionate? Oh, the reason why is because I don't pick up on the first cues. That gives me something concrete to actually work on to change. So that's the point of the next assessment that'll be coming out, is to actually, through comparison, help us identify these things. Because here's the thing about virtues. Virtues specifically and values in general are truisms. Nobody argues that you should be courageous, or you should be ambitious, or you should be kind, or you should be, like, everybody accepts that. And then what we do is we just throw them out there as abstractions and do nothing about them. And the only way we actually get better at leading with virtues is if we identify the leverage points, like, my problem is I don't see the need for compassion in this situation. Once I get those leverage points, now suddenly these virtues become practical things that I can do, change and make a difference with my life in that regard. So that's a beautiful example. Other thoughts on improving?
Tying in with both of those, a lot of times when we talk about finding the people we trust or seeking accountability partners, they're people we're comfortable with. But one of the things I started to develop was going to my strongest critic. And having a balance, not just the critics, but having a balance and being able to compare, and then opening the opportunity to build that relationship. That this person who otherwise might be a critic now understands I am seeking to improve, and I actually value your thoughts enough to ask you, notice me in the room, we're in this particular meeting, what is your observation, and can we debrief after the meetings?
I love that. That's powerful on at least two levels, probably more. One is that notion of actually, going and seeking feedback, right? You're going to get much further. Feedback is the breakfast of champions, as my father used to always say. And yeah, here it comes. But it is, right? And I can tell so many stories about people whose lives were just dramatically transformed just by being willing to seek and use feedback. At the same time, while that also helps me improve, by going to that person, you went beyond self-awareness to vulnerability. And that there's few things that can change relationships in a positive way and a negative way more than vulnerability.
And going deeper there,
Yep.
is the vulnerability is what lets you embody change.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't actually embody the change, take the change into your heart, take it into your physical being, then it's not lasting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well said.
So it's making that bold move of taking yourself, your body, to another person and asking for feedback that gets you into a place where you can actually do that.
Excellent. All right, good. All right, now, in addition to the ideas that people have shared here about what to do to improve on some virtue that I might be weaker on, hopefully what you noticed as you went through is there's like a gazillion links at the end of this survey to help you go to the tools that the Center for Positive Leadership offers. And so if I find, it's courage that I really need to work on, you click the link and suddenly here's 3 tools, here's some experts on it, here's some videos and recordings and other things, and there's resources there that you can use. And so first of all, did anyone click through and see relevant tools? And second, can you envision yourself using them? So that's why we do this tool showcase every month. Every month one of our affiliated professionals will come out with a new tool that will help with particular virtues and solving particular problems. And so we're always having a new one come out every month, putting it on the website and holding a showcase like this so that we can learn in person how to use those tools. But the point is that they help. And so one of the reasons we've also created this assessment is this way you know which tools to use, right? If you just go and there's 50 tools out there, where do I start? But if I take the assessment, then I can start here, or I can start here. Now one other question before, And before we run out of time. Yeah, please.
Will we have the ability to take it again focusing on the virtues?
You absolutely can.
Great.
Yep, that shouldn't be a problem at all. Yeah. And so let me actually talk about that for a minute as well, because you notice at the beginning it asked you to focus on 4 virtues. Part of that was to keep the length of the survey down. 4 is kind of a magic number because we can classify virtues into about 4 categories that are, psychometrically distinct in that regard. And so that way I was making sure that by picking one from each list, you would pick relatively distinct virtues as opposed to going in and saying, well, I'm going to work on compassion, love, generosity, and kindness, which would be all the same, right? And you're not really actually extending yourself and learning. The other thing that it does, though, is you may have noticed that the assessment and the results actually deliberately paired the virtues that you picked with their positive opposites. And so some of those may have been, oh, that's really interesting, and others of them may be, oh, that's really uncomfortable when you pick out those positive opposites in that way. But again, as we talked about earlier, it's the integration of positive opposites that takes us from virtues to virtuousness, where we're really elevating the moral and ethical efficacy of what we're doing. So as I mentioned, this is our model of positive leadership at the Center for Positive Leadership. And we say it's virtues-based, but it's not virtues-based in that, the 4 virtues that we care about are courage, compassion, honesty, and humility or something. We don't say, no, these are the right virtues. Every situation demands different virtues than other situations. And so in each situation, if I want to lead, then I have the possibility of pausing, because most of us are unable to increase the level of virtue that we exhibit without actually pausing. Earlier Vicki was talking about how busy we are. In today's world, it's even harder because there's a million pressures. But if we want to lead and not just manage, we pause, perceive the opportunity, consider the people involved, identify the relevant virtues to this situation, and then ask ourselves how to be exceptional. And once we know that, we can act with excellence so that other people feel elevated, choose to follow, and follow in their own way instead of just imitating or obeying. Because sometimes when we give people the freedom to follow in the way they choose rather than controlling, they may actually exceed our expectations. So that's where we're trying to head with all of this. And just so you know, when we're complete, we'll have 4 free and 2 paid ways of assessing and reflecting on our online tools. The first one you've seen today. The next one is the one I mentioned previously, which will be the advanced reflection for helping you identify specific circumstances in your life and comparing them. There will also be one that will be for helping you to plan events, to help me walk through the process of how do I actually prepare myself to lead in an intentional way. And then there will be one for actually getting feedback. So this is how I thought I did in this situation. Here's a link, pop it over to my friend. They go and give me feedback. And this is kind of the question we asked earlier. Sometimes they may have a different perception than we did about how we did, and so we can get the feedback there. We also have an Amplifier, which is an app for team coaching that you can use. And then other stuff would be upon request. So for example, if I wanted to do the Positive Leadership Simple Assessment, then you can contact the Center for Positive Leadership, and we will go out and collect data from all of your friends and coworkers or whatever, and then you can deal with the battery. Earlier I talked about feedback as the breakfast of champions, and boy, you get a lot of feedback when you go with that one. So those are a few of the things that are coming, and then finally we'll just close by here's the various resources that are available. You saw some of them on the website, but here's meet our coaches, consultants, and professors. Find and use more of our tools. Follow us on LinkedIn. That's an important one because whenever we have a new event or a new tool or something that comes out, we always post it there so that you're informed. We have programs and you can watch recordings of past events. So thank you for your time today. It's always fun to have everybody come out, and we appreciate you being here and hope it was useful. Thank you.